They taught the world how to fall in love with a face. A cane-twirling tramp. A pirate with a grin. A cowboy who never blinked. For 100 years, we memorized their names before we ever asked who they really were at home. But courtrooms kept records. Divorce filings kept receipts. Sons wrote memoirs their fathers never got to edit. And when you line up 10 of Hollywood's most beloved leading men side by side, the pattern isn't a coincidence, it's a system. Number 1. John Wayne. We start with the most American face in film history, a man who spent 4 decades playing the guy you could trust with your life. John Wayne, born Marion Morrison in Iowa in 1907, built an entire identity on quiet toughness. The man who didn't need to raise his voice because everyone already knew not to cross him. John Ford's westerns made him a legend by the late 1930s, and he barely left the spotlight for the next 30 years. Here's what the legend left out. During his divorce from second wife Esperanza Chada Bauer in the early 1950s, she testified under oath, in a courtroom, on the record, that Wayne had struck her repeatedly, blackened her eye, dragged her out of bed, and humiliated her in front of guests. Wayne's response was to deny everything and counter-accuse her of drinking and cheating. The case settled, the money moved, and the public simply moved on. But it wasn't isolated. Biographer Richard Douglas Jensen spent decades researching Wayne's life and concluded that he committed domestic violence against all 3 of his wives, not just one. Jensen also documented a severe drinking problem, the kind that produced sudden, unpredictable rages behind closed doors. Third wife Pilar Pallied eventually just walked away quietly in 1973, no headlines, no fight. Wayne died in 1979. Ronald Reagan gave the eulogy. The myth didn't crack, it hardened. And that's the through line you'll notice again and again in this list. The more iconic the image, the less anyone wanted to look behind it. Next, we go to the man whose face was arguably more recognizable than Wayne's, recognizable in literally every country with a movie screen. Number 2. Charlie Chaplin. Before television, before the internet, there was one universal celebrity, the bowler hat, the cane, the waddle. Charlie Chaplin, born in London in 1889, was, by most measures, the single most recognized human being on the planet by the 1920s. Audiences everywhere loved the tramp. Almost nobody was watching the man playing him. The pattern starts early and it's consistent. In 1918, Chaplin, 29 years old, began pursuing 16-year-old Mildred Harris. Years later came Lita Gray, whom he met on the set of The Kid when she was 12. By 15, he was romantically involved with her. When she got pregnant at 16, he took her across the border to Mexico for a quiet, private marriage, timed specifically to avoid statutory rape charges under California law. Their divorce in 1927 produced a 52-page legal filing detailing threats and abuse, reportedly costing Chaplin around $1 million to settle. The age gap pattern didn't stop there. Paulette Goddard was 24 when they married, Una O'Neill just 18. Chaplin eventually got barred from re-entering the U.S. in 1952 over alleged communist ties, spent his final years in Switzerland, and still walked away with an honorary Oscar in 1972 and a knighthood in 1975. He died in 1977, largely remembered for the hat and the cane. If you think that's the last time a beloved on-screen hero turns out to have a documented history with underage girls, wait until you hear what happened during a month-long criminal trial that somehow made one actor more popular. Number 3. Errol Flynn built his entire career on effortless charm. The pirate, the swashbuckler, the guy who made danger look like fun. Born in Tasmania in 1909, he drifted through New Guinea and Europe before landing in Hollywood in the mid-1930s. Captain Blood in 1935 made him a star almost overnight. His marriage to French actress Lily Damita was, by every account, a war zone. Hollywood nicknamed them the Battling Flynns. At their own first anniversary party, Damita reportedly smashed a champagne bottle over his head. He hit her back hard enough to break a tooth. Both ended up hospitalized. Warner Brothers cover story to the press: Flynn swerved his car to avoid a cat. Then in 1942, Flynn stood trial on statutory rape charges involving two teenagers, 15-year-old Peggy Satterley and 17-year-old Betty Hansen. The trial dominated national headlines for a month. He was acquitted on every count, and somehow came out more famous, popular enough that, "in like Flynn," became a phrase people still use today without knowing where it came from. His final years were rough: addiction to heroin and alcohol, a cancelled Warner Brothers contract, and a companion, Beverly Odland, whom he'd started pursuing when she was 15. He died in Vancouver in 1959 at 50. An autopsy found his liver looked like it belonged to a man 25 years older. Now picture the exact opposite public image, not a swashbuckler, but the most wholesome dad in America. That one might be the hardest to hear. Number 4, Bing Crosby. If you asked 1930s America to name the ideal father, they'd have said Bing Crosby. White Christmas. Going My Way. A hit radio show. He was literally voted Hollywood's most typical father in a 1937 poll. That image survived for decades, until his own son decided to break it. Crosby married actress Dixie Lee in 1930. They had 4 sons together. Dixie struggled with alcoholism throughout the marriage and died of ovarian cancer in 1952 at just 40. By multiple family accounts, Crosby himself was cold, controlling, and frequently absent, and when he was around, discipline turned physical and severe. In his 1983 memoir, Going My Own Way, eldest son Gary described near-daily beatings with a metal-studded belt. He also described being weighed every single week, with his father obsessing over the number, and being summoned to Bing's office for a beating if the scale displeased him. His brothers Dennis and Lindsay later confirmed the abuse happened, even if they didn't agree on exactly how bad it got. Crosby died in 1977 on a golf course in Spain, reportedly happy after shooting an .85. Gary's book came out 6 years later and quietly took the wholesome dad legend apart. The aftermath was brutal. 2 of Crosby's 4 sons didn't make it far into adulthood. Lindsay died by suicide in 1989, Dennis in 1991. Next up, a Bond actor whose real-life comments about hitting women were public record, and he never walked them back. Number 5, Sean Connery made Bond charming, controlled, and quietly dominant. According to his first wife, that wasn't just a character. Connery grew up poor in Edinburgh, left school at 13, worked as a milkman and a coffin polisher before the Navy, and eventually modeling led him into acting, with zero formal training. Cast as Bond in 1962, he went from nobody to global icon almost instantly. That same year he married Australian actress Diane Cilento. In her 2006 memoir, Cilento described over a decade of physical and emotional abuse. She said Connery resented her career. She'd been Oscar-nominated for Tom Jones in 1963, and pressured her to quit acting entirely. He controlled the money, turned down job offers on her behalf without telling her, and was, by her account, periodically violent. She detailed one incident in a Spanish hotel room in 1965 where he beat her badly enough that she locked herself in the bathroom and spent the night on the floor. Here's the part that isn't secondhand. In a 1965 Playboy interview, Connery himself said an open-handed slap was sometimes justified if a woman had been warned. When Barbara Walters brought it up in 1987, he didn't take it back. In 1993, Vanity Fair quoted him suggesting some women provoke violence, and should expect it. When Cilento's book reignited the story, he cancelled a public appearance rather than address it directly. He died in 2020 at 90, and most obituaries mentioned his comments about hitting women, if they mentioned them at all. Now go back further, to Hollywood's first great profile, a man so celebrated on stage that his personal collapse became a multi-generational curse. Number 6, John Barrymore. In the 1920s, John Barrymore was considered the finest actor in America, maybe in the English language. Born John Blythe in Philadelphia in 1882 into the country's most famous acting family, he earned the nickname, the Great Profile, for his looks and stage presence. His 1922 Hamlet ran 101 performances and was treated as a landmark in American theater. London gave him the same reception a year later. When sound arrived, he adapted easily, delivering strong work in Grand Hotel and 20th Century. He was also a severe, ultimately incapacitating alcoholic, and repeatedly violent with the women he married. His second wife, poet Blanche Ulrichs, described the marriage as an ongoing psychological battle. His third wife, Dolores Costello, had 2 children with him before filing for divorce in 1935 after years of alcoholic rages. His fourth wife, Elaine Barry, wrote about the violence of their brief marriage in her own memoir. By the late 30s, Barrymore's memory was so damaged that his lines had to be written on cue cards hidden around set. He died in 1942 at 60, his liver destroyed. The damage didn't stop with him. His son, John Drew Barrymore, father of actress Drew Barrymore, spent decades as a violent alcoholic, was jailed multiple times for spousal abuse, and stayed largely absent from his own daughter's childhood. That family pattern sets up our next story almost perfectly. A legendary actor whose alcoholism was, for decades, an open industry secret hidden from the public. Number 7 Spencer Tracy was, by the consensus of his peers, one of the greatest screen actors who ever lived, the only man at the time to win back-to-back Best Actor Oscars, for Captains Courageous and Boys Town. Katharine Hepburn, his partner for 26 years, said flatly he was the best she'd ever watched work. But Tracy married Louise Treadwell in 1923 and never divorced her, not even after his relationship with Hepburn began in 1942. Hepburn later said she respected that he stayed married, even knowing it permanently capped what she and Tracy could be to each other. What almost nobody outside their circle knew was Tracy's severe alcoholism, and what it did to him. Binges could last days or weeks, during which colleagues described him as genuinely frightening to be near, a stark contrast to the disciplined, generous man he was sober. Louise absorbed this for decades in near-total public silence. Biographers have linked much of his drinking to guilt over their son John being born deaf. The couple channeled some of that into founding the John Tracy Clinic in 1942, which still operates today. Tracy died in 1967, just 17 days after finishing Guess Who's Coming to Dinner with Hepburn. He was 67. Out of respect for Louise, Hepburn didn't attend the funeral. Louise herself never spoke publicly about what she'd lived through. Last on this list, an actor whose most famous role, a violent, hot-tempered mob boss's son, turned out to blur uncomfortably into real life. Number 8 James Caan became a star playing Sonny Corleone, the Corleone son who led with his fists and his temper, earning an Oscar nomination and cementing his image as Hollywood's live-wire tough guy. Born in the Bronx in 1940, he built a career on physical, combustible characters, from Brian's Song to Thief to Misery, and was widely respected inside the industry as a serious talent. In 1994, he was arrested on a misdemeanor domestic violence charge involving a former girlfriend. According to several former partners and wives, that arrest was just the one moment that became visible in a much longer pattern. He married 5 times. In later interviews, Caan himself acknowledged that his behavior had caused real harm to people he loved, and that he'd fallen short of who he should have been at home. His story is really the thesis of this whole list. In Hollywood, a tough, volatile screen persona has historically doubled as a kind of built-in excuse for the same behavior off-camera. Caan died in July 2022 at 82. The tributes were warm, and almost entirely about the films. 10 Men. 10 legends built by studios that knew exactly what they were protecting. The pattern wasn't an accident, it was the business model. What does it say that we're still watching their movies the same way?